Xgrowth has helped B2B tech companies design campaigns that open doors in their strategic target accounts, roll out targeted ABM programs, scale ABM programs, and select the right tool and tech stack for a successful ABM initiative. These are all things Xgrowth has helped their clients with. If you're interested to learn how Xgrowth can help your firm's ABM program, check out Xgrowth at xgrowth.com.au. That's xgrowth.com.au and chat with the APAC ABM agency.
What's up, marketers, and welcome to another episode of the Growth Colony podcast. I'm Liza from Xgrowth to tell you that each episode we bring in B2B leaders to chat about the yeses and nos to achieving those everyday wins in the marketing world. Whether you're new to the B2B game, working at a leadership level, or even just showing some interest, we know you'll love the episode. So grab a drink, get comfy, and enjoy the show.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode. I'm Shahin with Xgrowth, and today I'm talking to a special guest, second time on the podcast. Super excited for this chat. I'm talking to Nick Flude, CMO of Sekuro, about how to plan your career progression as a marketer, especially in the B2B space. Nick has a lot of experience on this front, and I can't wait to dive in. Nick, thanks for joining us.
Anytime, Shin. Always good to talk. You know that.
Absolute pleasure for having you here. And we were talking initially some time ago, and that's where the topic of this conversation came about. You have had multiple different roles in the B2B space at different companies. Like yes. You've had some very senior roles at large organizations and also at startups and kind of challenger brands. First question I want to ask is, why do you think marketers should aspire to a CMO role?
The answer to that one is going to be an obvious answer, which is because it's the top of the tree. You know, supposedly it's the top of the tree in terms of professional or formal marketing roles. You know, ultimately somebody has, other than the CEO, somebody has the organizational, strategic, executive leadership of that function. Is that function marketing? Yes. Okay. Then the leader should be CMO. And some organizations will kind of blend it to then go, well, actually, it's the VP of marketing. But in a conversation with a former CEO, he was saying, well, look, the reason why one of the executives was a VP was because they could always put somebody as the chief over the top. And that was a CEO saying it, to then say, okay, in his structure, what he wanted was truly the one person that he could point to then say, right, she looks after that function. She is the chief, revenue officer. We're seeing now chief revenue officers coming up. And are they sales? Not really. There's a bit of growth in there. There's a bit of marketing. There's a bit of sales in there. But I think, again, ultimately, I just think if you're aspiring to be the best that you can be, then the chief marketing officer is the title that you should be aiming for if ultimately that's what you want to do to take on that executive leadership role.
So those are the pros. I want to talk about the other side of the coin.
Well, the pros, you get all the glory, of course.
Yeah, you get all the glory. You get all the, you get the fancy title. You're a chief X officer.
Chief of something.
Yes, chief of something. Why shouldn't I aspire to become a CMO? So what are some of the downsides, or what are some of the things that one should be aware of? Basically, what are the cons?
Well, I think there are negatives in all the jobs. It can be a busy job. It can be a job, particularly in a startup, where there's you, and then you have to go, well, I'd be rubbish as the CMO of a mature organization. I know I would, because I like getting in there and scrapping and kind of building things, and we'll kind of talk about that later. So what are the downsides? The downsides can be pressure. You are an executive at that level. So if you're successful in your career and you do take on, a large role in a large organization, then you get all of the fun of the fair that comes with that, but you also get the pressure as well. As two industries together, sales and or two functions together, either sales and marketing, growing up and delivering revenue ultimately to the business. That's one of my kind of passions, is to make sure that marketers are very aligned to the sales organization or very aligned to the go-to-market part of the organization. So again, one of the negatives might be is that if it's not for you, if you just want to be a contributor who does the thing that makes them successful, it's one of those situations where you go from being good at doing, and then you get given more responsibility, and then you do less doing because you've actually got to do more organization, other resources to get things done. And then the higher up you go, there's less hands-on marketing and more strategic management, I guess, at that point, or management across different functions. So some people, that's not of interest, and that's a perfectly good reason not to want to become a CMO. And then on the flip side, that's the fun bit, getting involved in the business, really getting across how functions operate to build an organization. And that's really when you look at the startup scale-up world, that's the interesting, that's the bit that kind of excites me to then go, right, I'm looking after all of it. What do we do first? What do we do next? Where's the end goal? So being able to paint that picture, being able to kind of build an organization towards that ultimate goal, that's the positive. As a negative, a lot of stuff to be done. Every day there's something that needs to be doing because you need top, the mile high view looking down, but then you've also got to go and get into the weeds. That as a startup kind of scale up kind of CMO in a large organization, again, I'm not across that one, but you're looking at strategy, you're looking at, results, you're looking at kind of dashboards and big trend indicators and things like that.
Got it. Okay. Now, a lot of people will be listening and they would be, they might be a marketing manager, marketing lead, marketing coordinator, right? And there's always that question. Some people would leave the marketing field and some would continue. But then there is the question of like, what are the options? Like what is the difference between a marketing director? What is the difference between a VP? What is the difference between of those and a CMO? I want to also touch, you talked about Chief Revenue Officer, CRO. I want to touch on that as well. What are some of the differences between, especially these top roles? We see a lot of marketing directors in Australia, especially for, international brands, where there would be sometimes like a head of marketing or a marketing director for ANZ or APJ.
Or region, yeah.
What are some of those differences between, again, head of marketing, marketing director, VP, CMO? What are some of those differences that you've experienced and seen?
I think so. A lot of it comes down to the scope of influence that you have, and also coupled with the organization that you actually happen to find yourself in at that point in time. So yes, if you're within ANZ and you're working for a North American or a European head office, then you're going to be kind of part of a regional structure that reports up potentially to a VP of international field marketing, who themselves then report up into the CMO or an EVP or something like that. So I don't think there's any kind of tried and true structure other than saying, right, I've always looked at it to then say, how much responsibility can you take on and what's the expectation of that responsibility? So coming in, and if you're a marketing coordinator or a marketing executive, then you're kind of doing things where you might not see the whole picture, the big picture. And what you're doing is you're kind of doing the things that you're asked to do. And then when you've done them, it's like, I've done that one. What do you want me to do next? So then you're starting to kind of go, as you then mature into that role. And I've said to my kind of team, that first 18 months in a role, you're learning to do the role. The next 18 months, you're kind of getting good at doing the role. Then after about 3 years, 2.5 years to 3 years, you're kind of looking for the next step up. The next step up has been more responsibility. So you then start to stop being, you're still action oriented, but you stop being kind of tactical in the sense of I've done this, what do I do now? You start owning more and more things end to end. That gives you that management level. I'm managing my area, I'm managing my tasks. So then you start to look up and go, okay, well, what's the jump up to the director level? And it could be just something as simple as, you've been there 4 years and you're going to get a job, you're going to get a promotion, and it's, essentially the same job, different shovel, as they used to say. But you've got tenure and you're still doing the same thing, and then you've just come up from marketing manager to senior regional or senior marketing manager, and then your next career path, your next career jump and your next salary bump comes from being a marketing director or being seen to be a GM marketing director. But that doesn't necessarily, you're kind of doing that role of I'm planning out strategy, I'm aligning what we're doing with the business, I'm then coordinating and reporting upwards, and then they're taking that stream kind of downwards. That next level above that into a VP is either you're setting the strategy, you're setting the direction, or you're sitting around the boardroom table or the senior leadership table, and then the CEO says, all right, this is where we're going, this is what we're going to do. And as they go around the table, you're kind of realizing that the response to the question about what are you going to do, you're now representing an entire function. So if you're in that position, then you are a VP or you are in that chief kind of role. Culturally, you might have differences regionally between are they the VP of marketing, are they the CMO? But operationally, are you at the functional leadership, role? So who looks after marketing? Nick does. Or are you then standing up and then there's an elevation above that where you are an executive leader with a chief ... And half of the time you're representing your home function, I guess. And then half of the time you're actually listening and going, right, what can we do over here? How can I get involved with operations? Are you a good friend of finance? What do they need? Because the conversation at that level is much more about the progress of the business towards its goals. And you have that conversation based on your knowledge or your experience as a marketeer, versus then dropping down a level, which is you're not having broad business conversations, but you are ultimately always responsible for everything marketing. Does that make sense? Just in terms of that lens of, are you looking downwards or are you looking very much across with a little bit of downwards?
It does. It does make sense.
I don't know if it's true or not, but it always kind of rings true. And certainly when I've been interviewing and trying to grow a team and you're trying to put, you get people who kind of go, you put a job out and you want a marketing director, regional marketing director, and then people apply and you go, well, do you do this? No. Have you done that before? Have you done this? No. What's your language of finance? What's your language of lead management? What's your language of staff management? And they don't have any. So it's like, well, actually, you're not.
I want to come to that. I want to interject, right? Because I want to touch on this and I want us to give this enough attention. And I want to come back to it. But before kind of get to that, there's one other thing I want to ask you. There's a lot of conversations, and you see this quite a lot in a lot of US entities where you're starting to see the rise of the title CRO, the Chief Revenue Officer. Where do you see that sitting in organizations, especially here in Australia? Like what's up with the CRO role?
I don't think there's anything up with it. I think you're guiding me to a position that I'm going to take, which is about marketing not being seen to be a valid business function. And I'll die in a ditch about kind of saying that marketing is a valid business function. But the CRO, used to be kind of GM of sales and marketing. That didn't work because you've got one person who's generally a salesperson looking at a 90-day window, also then trying to be very, split in terms of their view to then go, well, actually, do you want to drive marketing to be 90 days or do you want to look at that future growth 18-month window? So it was a very, I'll use the word bipolar, but I'm conscious that I don't want to be kind of upsetting anybody, but, that split of short-term versus medium to long-term. So is the CRO any different from a director of sales and marketing and a GM of kind of sales and marketing? Kind of, but kind of not. They might have customer success thrown under them as well. So therefore, from a revenue perspective, that one individual is looking at the sales funnel, the marketing, funnel, so the go-to-market piece. But they're also then responsible, let's go on a SaaS perspective, where instead of that customer journey, that traditional customer journey ending at purchase, you've now got onboarding, you've now got renewal, you've now got expansion, you've now got advocacy, ultimately all the way through that customer journey. So good CROs are looking at all of that end to end. You don't want to lose a customer. You want to grow and expand. And how do you turn that customer into ultimately an advocate? And then underneath that full customer journey, field of view, you've got your go-to-markets with sales marketing, but you've also then got your customer success, customer experience, or some customer-focused entity as well. So it's an addition to that traditional sales and marketing. But again, ultimately, it comes back to the one thing that we should all be caring about, which is the organization able to grow and then hit its goals? Because if you do, it's a very powerful, position to kind of be in.
Do you think that role works, considering what we just talked about, right? Like considering the fact that, hey, most of the times you see that role being occupied by a former salesperson.
Yep.
Most of the times because they are a bit more, I don't want to use the word aggressive, but they're more forthcoming. They would, and that's part of the role, right? That's part of your personality that you got to ask, you got to push, because your role is quite hard. So most of the times you see that role being filled by a previous
sales professional. Correct.
Do you think that this role works?
Well, yes is the short answer. It does, with the right person in the chair and then the right supporting functional leader sitting underneath those areas. So you could absolutely structure it so that the CRO is very good commercially, knows how to talk to customers, knows how to talk to prospects. But underneath them, this is where you would then say, right, there's a VP of marketing, there's a VP of sales, there's a VP of CS underneath that structure. So that can be quite common, where that CRO then is at the executive table. And again, it goes back to proving my point earlier about then having those functional leaders sitting underneath it, and you're somehow disconnected from whatever the executive table is, the mythical executive thought process, but you're a little bit kind of disconnected from it, because it's like, no, you do marketing. And then does it give the VP of marketing in that organizational structure the ability to be promoted to a CMO? No, because there's no CMO role there. It's being held by the CRO. Does that make sense?
Got it. It does.
But it's all a people, it's all a people and a structural thing.
It's all the people's game.
It's all about a people.
I hear you.
But I think it works well in a SaaS-y, platformy way because of that addition of the customer success piece. I don't necessarily know whether you would have a CRO that includes customer success in that traditional, sell it once, then nothing else happens. I think it's a good model to kind of build into that. But then we talk about kind of stress at the C-suite level. That's a big role when you're looking at kind of re-signs and renewals and expansions, as well as then net new acquisition and then ultimately kind of demand gen. But it's a good role because it's also one of those where you've got, I think on the flip side of that, you've then got that concept of the chief customer officer. So is there an overlap there? I kind of think there is, because the customer's then sitting in the middle. So is the chief customer officer somebody who isn't commercially aware? No, I think, again, they have to be, because they're looking at land and expands, renewals, cross-sell, upsell. So is that done by a customer success team? Is that done by a sales team with a CS hat on? And I have to do some more reading on that to kind of see how that kind of lays out. But I think there's definitely a little bit of an overlap between the two functions. So it'll be interesting to kind of look at some use cases about corporate structure where you've got a CRO plus a chief customer officer. And then is there room in that to actually have a CMO? Or are you then just naturally bumping up to that ceiling of, well, I can't, there's no seat at the table?
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Changing gears again. Talk about skills.
Sure.
I touched on this briefly. I look at skills when it comes to marketers as it expands, the opportunities expand in terms of where you can develop, and then it narrows. So what I mean by that is I think that as a junior marketer, you kind of come in, and there are so many different areas that you can focus on. You can focus on, becoming an expert in PR, becoming an expert in copywriting, content, SEO, you name it, right? Performance marketing, yada yada yada. And those areas could be quite a lot. And it's you in the trenches. It's tactical, and you build up that knowledge. And then it starts to narrow when you start to move further. So when you've reached to, let's say, a senior SEO, manager or something like that, then the next step is to become like a director or become a head of something, and then get to the director level and the VP and the CMO level, and that starts to narrow going up from there. My question is, going from, hey, I'm at the top of the game for SEO, I'm at the top of the game for content. Now I want to really take that next step and start to go into those managerial, again, the head of, marketing director, VP, CMO role. What are the skills that the marketer needs to develop that they might have not developed so far in order to be able to start making those steps?
I think it's irrespective of what you're good at, you've now got to go, and it goes back to that 18-month, if the only thing you've ever done is SEO, then you have to start learning about other things that broaden your skill set. So you can be really, the opening conversation, why would somebody not want to be a CMO? Well, because all they want to be good at is SEO or field marketing or events or PR. That's perfectly reasonable. You know what you want, I won't even say limitations, but you just know what you want, and knowing what you don't want in life is just as important as knowing what you do want. But to go up and across, you've actually got to build on new skills. So one of the easiest ways, that anybody can do that is just, is ask why. Okay, why does what you do benefit the organization, benefit your revenue stream? Does it increase your growth? Does it allow you to attract and retain more customers? And that, I'm hoping that's the interesting bit, because as you're then slowly kind of adding more skills to your tool belt, you then start to become more rounded as a marketer. You then start to see where the business is going, and you can actually take the skill set plus a curious and inquiring mind to then go and do something bigger with that attitude or with that aptitude. You have a certain set of skills, but really you're starting to then hire in or grow your attitude, your aptitude and understanding of what the business is doing. But I do think if you just say, right, if you define yourself as, I'm a field marketer, that's your first mistake. Don't define yourself just as a field marketer. Define yourself as a marketer who then is open to doing a bit around SEO, doing a bit around the marketing, the areas that you don't have, plus the other areas of the business.
So I want to touch on that. Sure. Right? So that makes sense that hey, I got to understand a lot of other areas of marketing. I got to know segmentation. I got to know PR. I got to get familiar with this and that and so on and so forth. What are some of the skills that maybe you have found that you had to develop that maybe was outside of that sphere of marketing?
Well, it's the business part of it. It's the why. I've got the mug from last time sitting up there. If I can point to it, basically going, go talk to sales, because it's critical that as marketers, there are still many marketers out there that have no connection to how their business grows or how their business generates revenue, and the concept of a revenue marketer, understanding where that comes from, I think is one of the biggest gaps that we have as a function, as a discipline, as a profession. And luckily, there's a whole body of organizations and kind of marketers with an opinion that go, no, that's why we're doing it. it's critical as a startup. If you're there and you're the marketer and there's 5 people and one's the sales person, one's the founder, one's the engineering lead, and then it's like, well, you can't sit there and go, I'll be back next week. I've got 3 weeks worth of SEO to do, and just disappear for 3 weeks. Because if you've got to go and talk to the customer or work with the CEO or sit with engineering or do something, you do it. So then as that organization starts to grow, at that point in time, you've been exposed to a little bit of sales, exposed to a little bit of product, a little bit of finance, a little bit of this. And that's the fun part of kind of startup scale-ups, because the exciting part is when you open the cupboard, it's empty. But to marketers or anybody that, is used to having things in the cupboard and big programs, and we used to outsource that to an agency, and we used to outsource that they don't necessarily survive in the startup world, because actually you've got to go and, I'm typing, you've just got to get it done, because it's got to be done. So pigeonholing yourself and saying, no, that's not me, I don't know about that, YouTube it, Google it, find it out, go do that, and then come back with another skill set to then go, I'm not polished, but I can get it most of the way. And then as a team, just revise it, roll with it, iterate it.
Okay. I want to ask another question. This is more specific to Australia. In your experience and working in the Australian market, what are some of the weakest points marketers in Australia need to develop to further their career progression?
I think it's an interesting point. Regionally, there's a mixture of people who have only done ANZ's a small market, so that's the reality of it. Australia, New Zealand is a small domestic market in comparison to either the single market of the United States or that broad Europe, and APAC. So one of the things that does limit us is that we could potentially have a very small view of the world. That's not necessarily a positive or a negative, because then the flip side of it is to then say you've got a North American marketer who goes, well, my market is West Coast, and then they're including Central, and then they gradually get to the East Coast and go, right, I've got this massive market of opportunity for my product. But then the leadership is saying, yeah, but we're now going to expand into EMEA, we're now going to expand into APAC. So that tends to be one person that, you're now the APAC marketing leader, and you're like, oh, I've got to do Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, the ASEAN countries and those kind of things. So when we look at the Australian marketeers, finding people who have had the opportunity to work for a head office who's expanding globally, there's not enough. I say there's not enough of those. There's not enough of those Australian organizations that are growing overseas and therefore giving Australian marketeers hands-on international expansion experience. Because the flip side of that is, if you're in one of these growth areas, or you see an overseas organization expanding into Australia, there's a high chance that they're going to look for somebody with international marketing experience for that next role. So what we don't want is to have 2 of us imports to the country. I realize the irony of what I'm saying, but people coming in from overseas going, hey, I've done Australia, I've done America and Canada, and therefore that's my international experience. But because you then work for the head office, then you're going to be planted in for a 2-year secondment in sunny Sydney. So international exposure is one. I think we have there is nothing wrong with the marketing education that comes out of Australia, New Zealand. The Australian Marketing Institute and others are producing world-class marketers. But for some reason, there aren't that many who are taking that to the international stage and going, right, I bring an Australian point of view where we do look at, we're used to looking outside of our own kind of borders and things like that. But is there anything fundamentally wrong with Australian marketers? Absolutely not, other than just that if you're looking for an international growth role, have some international growth experience if you can. Otherwise, you're going to be pigeoned in that I've done Australia, they're adding New Zealand onto my responsibilities. If I do well at that, I might get a little bit of Asia, but it's going to be the English speaking part of Asia, not the Japanese speaking part, because they're all they have kind of different kind of sentiments and things like that. So
yeah, got it. How do you find kind of the leadership at the kind of the very top when it comes to marketing? So in the CMO levels that might be exposed to multiple geographies, do you see much difference in terms of Australia and some of the other areas?
I'm going to say yes, and it goes back to that. What is defined as international experience these days? So if you're an Australian, if you're an Australian marketeer who has an online platform, a SaaS platform, and you have customers globally, is that enough international experience? Or do you have to be, somebody that works within a massive tower block in, Portland to be validated as an international marketer to then come into, the colonies to then give those kind of words of wisdom? Now, in that situation, you've still got the two sides to it. The Aussie marketer is, I guess, by nature, they're used to looking beyond the border versus a North American marketer who potentially only looks at the North American piece. So what you hope is that when you're going up to that level and you're meeting that CMO, you've got somebody who has international experience, international point of view. They've done a little bit. They understand that geographies are different. They understand that the buying cycle is different. They understand that the cultural norms are different between. And I know it's an obvious thing to be saying, is to then say, don't take a North American view and try to translate even, photography. Don't assume that can translate directly into Australia or into APAC, because it doesn't. And there are still organizations who go, well, no, we do all languages as long as it's English. And I'm like, well, that's not going to fly. Or they'll do, English and Spanish and then try to then push that into an ASEAN or an APAC region where there's just so many different kind of subtleties that you need to take into account. I did in my last role, we had a language translation app sitting behind the website. So where we would say we're promoting a webcast, we would say, time, pull up the chair, grab a cup of coffee, and spend 20 minutes with us. So having somebody who has diversity of language or is a native kind of Cantonese speaker to then come in there and go, right, this is what the machine is translating and it's getting the intent of it, but people don't drink coffee. So why don't you start talking about, grabbing yourself a bubble tea and sitting down? So there's the cultural piece there, which is not just the words, but actually the true cultural, significance of the intent of what you're trying to do, which is just relax a little bit. We're just going to give you some brain food and you drink the beverage of your choice. But that wouldn't necessarily come across. Would you go, well, just grab a coffee, grab a cup of tea, sit with us. So having that ability to have international experience and then international awareness, I get these things sound motherhood, but actually they're not. They're actually very kind of deep-seated. And then as a marketer, where you're then trying to influence somebody who doesn't know who you are to know who you are, and then like who you are, and then prefer what you do to somebody else. As a marketer, we kind of get that. And that's what you're really looking for at that leadership level, to then say, are you the CMO of an organization, but you've only ever worked in one geography? I would argue that somebody that's just slugged it out in multiple geographies can be a better fit at that executive level, because you're looking at, has anybody worked in Singapore before? Has anybody worked in, Japan before? It is not a trivial exercise to go and expand overseas.
Nick, I mean, this has been great, right? But before we wrap up, I wanna ask, do you have any other advice for kind of aspiring marketers who wanna kind of move up the ladder, and they're asking themselves, what's the best way and what should I do? Do you have any? I mean, you've shared a lot of advice, but is there anything that maybe we haven't touched on that you think it's important for us to talk about?
I think there's, I'll preface this with, this is a conversation that you and I have had already. So is marketing seen to be a valid function, and therefore at that leadership level, are you able to get to the top of being the CMO or get to the top of your profession because you've done the hard yards, you've worked, you've learnt, you've potentially taken on tertiary education, and you've got a bit more and you've got a bit more knowledge. Ultimately, the secret is going to be taking on more and then delivering to your boss, much more of doing the job of your boss. That's kind of essentially it. So if you're only doing this one thing, where does that one thing fit in connection to the other things? Can you understand that? And then the next time you're asked to do that, can you deliver it plus plus? So instead of just doing, I've done the website for the event, I've done the website, plus I've done the socials, plus I've done the thing, plus I've done the briefing pack. So the more that you're seen to be taking on, in addition to the tasks that you've been given, kind of signals that you've got that spark that I was talking about, to then go, no, you understand the context of why what you're doing sits within the business. And as you're then doing more and more of that, then you build up you don't have to be an expert in all of it. So I know a bit about SEO, I know a bit about website stuff, I know a bit about design, I know a bit about product marketing, I know a bit about comms, I know a bit about PR. And I'm not trying to be experts in all of them, but actually my job is to balance all of those and give them budget and resourcing and set them up and prioritize one, prioritize the other, downplay the other. And that just comes from me historically having just done the bit and then a bit more, and then done that again and then a bit more, and done that again and then a bit more. So ultimately that's kind of building up. Have I had a lot of formal tertiary education? No. I've got a bachelor's degree and then I've done postgrad, but most of it has been on the job. But you're coming up and you're able to kind of, stand shoulder to shoulder with people who have come up through other disciplines with tertiary education. And this is getting to the anecdote about, as a CMO, do you need to be somebody who's come up through the ranks of marketing, or, as was called out at the marketing conference a couple of years ago, to then say, on the stage, I'm a CMO, but I don't know a lot about marketing. I'm a good manager. And to me in the audience, that rankled me, I guess, because you've got a room full of marketers who are going, well, I thought I had to just dig in and do more, and then I would get to be the senior person. But you're telling me that as a CMO, you could just be brought in, horizontally without really any marketing experience, but actually you've got management. You were seen to be a good manager, so stick them in the marketing team because it's just colouring in an event over there. So as a function, and then as advice to marketeers, it's go get tertiary education if it makes sense, build up your skill sets where it makes sense, but take on more. But ultimately align yourself and understand to the commercial goals of any business. So understand how their revenue is generated, but also then how it flows through the organization. Unless it's, and again, I'm only counting this based around B2B, where you've got a little bit more of a longer term, could be procurement driven buying cycle. This isn't valid. None of my comments are valid for consumer. Here's the thing. Do you want this? Do you want it in pink? Yes. All right, go. But if you've got a long, complex buying cycle, understand that. Go back to the mug. Go talk to sales, because that makes you a more rounded person. As you're sitting at the seat, you can see, well, there's a leading indicator that says pipeline isn't big enough. And whose challenge is pipeline? Well, it's both sales and marketing, because we both do a thing that is very related to pipeline. But ultimately, the CEO doesn't care whose responsibility is. They just need to see pipeline in growth, or pipeline covering your quarterly close one rate on a ratio of 2 to 3 or whatever it is. So just, all my advice is just take on more. The answer is always yes, take on more, and just get involved in the business by just doing as much as you can. And, if you've got a carry a box and be there at 5 a.m. and leave at 8 o'clock. Guess what? We've all done that, because you
got to do it. Got to do the hard yard.
Yeah, you've just got to deliver what's got to be delivered, at the end of the day.
No, I love it. I love the strong hustle message at the end, Nick. That's good. Look, this has been a great chat. I think you've shared some very critical points for whoever it is that looking to kind of grow. Like, I love how you talked about, hey, what to expect and what not to expect, how to prepare for it. What does that life look like? Are you really made for that or not? You've talked about the skills, the breadth as much as the depth of marketing skills, and then some of the other areas that one needs to develop, and also some of the things that specifically Australian marketers need to be conscious of. So I really appreciate this conversation. It was again a lot of insights that you shared, and yeah,
probably not
thank
very
you so much
articulately, so I apologize to the
No, I think it was this is the nature of a podcast, right? Like we want to get insights from people who are in the trenches, who haven't had time to put it in a book and organize it that way, and it's fresh from the trenches and in the weeds.
Definitely,
so I completely love it.
Definitely fresh and potentially unthought, but there you go. It is what it is.
No, thanks so much, Nick. Really appreciate it. And again, thanks again for coming on the podcast for the second time.
Too easy. I'll be back for a third time.
Looking forward to it.
You're welcome.
We just dropped the first in-depth study into account-based marketing in the region. We surveyed more than 50 senior APAC marketing practitioners to uncover ABM usage, motivations, benefits, and pain points across the Asia Pacific region. We provide actionable insight, optimization techniques, and solutions to key pain points identified in the survey. The State of Account-Based Marketing APAC report is an invaluable guide for B2B marketers seeking to harness the power of ABM. Get your copy today at abm.xgrowth.com.au/report. That's abm.xgrowth.com.au/report. Or you can just hit the link in the podcast description to get your copy.
Today's episode of Growth Colony was produced by Alexander Hipwell and Liza Maywald. It was edited by Dave Samito, with additional editing by Liza Maywald and music arrangement by Alexander and Liza. Special thanks to Tina Wabe. We couldn't make this show without you. Growth Colony is hosted by Shahin Hoda, Director of Growth at Xgrowth. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe and give us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Do you think you'd be a great guest, or just interested in a chat? Send through an email at podcast@xgrowth.com.au. That's podcast@xgrowth.com.au. That's all for now. We'll catch you next week, right here on Growth Colony.